Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going on a massive sensory journey across a continent that completely defies simple definition. We're going to explore Australia's true nature by moving through 4 distinct, absolutely incredible biomes. This isn't just a list of places on a map, it's an exploration of deep time, enduring culture, and ecosystems that are shifting right before our very eyes.
Picture this. You've just slipped below the surface of the ocean. What is the very first sound you hear underwater on the Great Barrier Reef? You'd probably guess it's the crunching of parrotfish eating coral, or maybe just the rush of bubbles. But for a lucky few, it's actually a strange mechanical hum. Divers call it the Star Wars sound. It's literally the song of a 6-meter dwarf minke whale sliding past, so close you can read the pale markings on her flanks. That kind of sensory surprise is exactly what we're focusing on today.
Now, at the heart of our explainer today is this really wild contrast. Australia is a land of massive extremes. On one hand, it's arguably the oldest continent on Earth, with an unbroken line of Aboriginal custodianship going back at least 65,000 years at sites like Majid Bibi. But on the flip side, it holds some of the most fragile ecosystems on the planet, environments that are currently dealing with unprecedented modern flux. It's incredibly ancient, yet super delicate.
So here's our game plan. First, the reef in flux. Second, we cool off in Tasmania. Third, we hit the red center. Fourth, South Australia's wild edge. Then, we'll weave it all together through the threads of deep time, before outlining a killer 14-day itinerary to experience it all mindfully.
All right, part 1, the reef in flux, water and color.
When we look at the numbers, things are definitely shifting. The 2024/2025 report from the Australian Institute of Marine Science shows the largest annual drop in coral cover in almost 40 years. We're talking a 25% decline in the north, roughly 14% in the center, and a massive 33% in the south following back-to-back bleaching events. But here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. The reef isn't done. It's in a state of serious volatility and flux. There are still fast-growing corals out there doing their thing, and plenty of reefs still have solid cover. It's an active, working ecosystem.
Man, within that shifting ecosystem, you can still find totally mind-blowing encounters. Take Ribbon Reef 1, for example. For a very short window in June and July, you can actually swim with dwarf minke whales. It's super exclusive. Only 9 operators are even permitted to do this. The boat cuts its engines, you grab a surface rope, and these curious 7-ton whales just voluntarily cruise right up to you. And every single whale has white shoulder patches as unique as a human fingerprint. Plus, the whole experience is guided by indigenous sea country custodians like the Yirganaji and Gunganji peoples, which adds such a deep layer of meaning.
Moving on to part 2. Tasmania, the cold antidote, cold green wilderness. If the reef is all about warm, bright aquatic colors, Tasmania is the ultimate reset. Think of an island the size of Ireland, absolutely covered in Gondwanian rainforest that's actually older than the breakup of the supercontinent itself. It's a cold, clean, ancient green wilderness. And the air? It's literally some of the cleanest on Earth. Down at Kennecott, or Cape Grim, the CSIRO just celebrated 50 years of monitoring, and it's one of only 3 premier baseline stations on the entire planet for pure air. Just imagine taking a massive breath of that pristine air while standing on Jurassic sea cliffs that drop 300 meters straight down into the crashing Southern Ocean. Down here, what you experience is all about exactly where you are and when. Say you're at Ronnie Creek between 4 and 7 p.m. You're going to hear these chunky wombats just snorting indifferently right next to the boardwalk. Wait until after dark at Cradle Mountain and you can witness the intense feeding rituals of Tasmanian devils. Or jump to day 4 of the Three Capes track hike and you'll walk right into this crazy microclimate, a freezing, mossy cloud forest where the cold air condenses and just swallows up the whole gully in mist and fungi.
Okay, part 3, the red center, a cultural reframe, silence and ochre.
So we leave the cold green behind and head to the desert. And the silence out here is just profound. Seriously, the wind blowing through a desert oak tree sounds exactly like a small ocean. But how we interact with this space has completely shifted. Back in October 2019, the climb up Uluru was permanently closed. And as Anangu elder Sammy Wilson beautifully points out in this quote, that wasn't something for visitors to mourn, it was a huge cause for celebration. It was a massive cultural reframe. It shifted the rock from being treated as a tourist playground back to what it truly is, a sacred church. It was Australian law and Jukapa, the traditional law and culture, finally working hand in hand.
And the experiences that have grown around the rock since then are pure magic. Look at Bruce Munro's Field of Light installation. Picture 50,000 solar-powered glass spheres spreading across an area the size of 7 football fields. When the desert goes pitch black under the Milky Way, these stems just pulse and breathe with gentle rhythms of violet, blue, and ochre. It's actually hitting its 10-year anniversary in April 2026. It is such a brilliant sensory contrast to the ancient stone of Uluru sitting just miles away.
All right, on to part 4, South Australia's Wild Edge. Vines, sharks, and ancient mountains.
I've got to say, South Australia is probably the continent's most underrated state. This is where the history of complex animal life literally began, and you've got world-class food and wine thriving right up against these wild, untamed oceans. Author Bill Bryson hit the nail on the head when he said that 80% of all plants and animals in Australia exist nowhere else on Earth. Because it's so geographically isolated, the wildlife you'll see here is entirely, unmistakably unique to this one specific pocket of the globe.
And talk about extremes, you can pack a ridiculous amount of variety into just a few days' drive. You can sip Barossa Valley Shiraz made from vines that were planted way back in 1847. Then you can hike into Wilpena Pound, which is this massive natural amphitheater carved into mountains that are 800 million years old. Feeling brave? You can head offshore and cage dive near a population of nearly 1,500 adult great white sharks. Or grab a snorkel in Whyalla and swim with tens of thousands of giant Australian cuttlefish. The concentration of natural extremes here is just off the charts.
But we've got to circle back to that core theme of fragility. According to state government data, in March 2025, an unprecedented algal bloom known as Karinia mikimatoe hit about 30% of South Australia's coastline. It impacted over 500 marine species and set off a massive joint federal and state response. So just like the reef, these majestic coastlines are incredibly susceptible to rapid environmental shifts. It's a sobering reminder of just how delicate the balance really is.
Which brings us to part 5, Threads of Deep Time, Connecting the Continent.
So we've jumped from the tropical reef to the freezing south, out to the desert, and along the wild edge. But what actually ties this whole massive continent together? It's the sheer, mind-boggling scale of time. We're talking 800 million years ago when the Flinders Ranges were forming, mountains that rivaled the Himalayas. Then 175 million years ago, those giant dolerite sea cliffs in Tasmania were forged. At least 65,000 years ago, we see evidence of Aboriginal occupation up at Majid Bebe. And then literally a blink of an eye ago in 1847, the oldest continuously producing Shiraz vines were planted.
But I really want to focus on that one number, 65,000. That is absolutely crucial. It's not just a cool statistic on a timeline. That represents an incredible, unbroken line of continuous human custodianship. It's the connective tissue of this entire explainer. Whether you're on Adnyamathanha land in the mountains, Anunga land out at Uluru, Palawa land in Tasmania, or sea country on the reef, you are standing on deeply, deeply cared-for ground.
Finally, part 6, the 14-day arc, experiencing the true nature.
So how do you practically and mindfully experience these 4 fragile biomes without just rushing through them? You need a solid plan. And honestly, having structure is more important now than ever. In 2024, the post-pandemic visitor economy in Australia exploded to a record $180.6 billion. Flights are packed, and remote lodges are operating at absolute capacity. With millions of people wanting to connect with these spaces, mindful, planned travel isn't just a nice recommendation anymore, it's an absolute necessity to protect these environments.
So here's what an ideal 14-day shoulder season itinerary looks like. Step 1. Spend your first 4 days soaking up the warmth and color of the reef, maybe timing it perfectly for the June mink whale season. Step 2, days 5 through 8, fly south to Tasmania to totally shock the system with cold, ancient wilderness and pure air. Step 3, days 9 to 11, head into the profound silence of the red center. And step 4, wrap it all up on days 12 through 14 on the wild, mega-diverse edge of South Australia. It is literally the perfect sensory arc. There's a great quote by the writer Bruce Chatwin where he says, "Being lost in Australia gives you a lovely feeling of security." And it's so true. When you strip away all the modern noise and really structure your journey through these deeply ancient landscapes, you don't feel isolated at all. You feel totally grounded. You feel anchored by just how enduring the land around you is. Which leaves us with one final thing to think about. When you finally take this trip and you find yourself standing out there on an 800 million-year-old landscape that's been actively cared for by at least 65,000 years of continuous human custodianship, are we just tourists passing through, or are we brief, incredibly lucky witnesses to deep time?
Definitely something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.